I'm Rafael from CrossFit Olten, and I'm here with Manuel from Ma Strength. And this is the second day of the seminar we're attending. On the first day we did some snatches. Now we're gonna do some clean and jerks. Manuel, can you tell us a bit about your backstory? So everything from where you grew up to where you first came in contact with weightlifting, over your period in China, and why you're doing this coaching here in Switzerland right now. So just talk about this time.
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah, it is.
So I was born in New York, and I grew up in Austin, Texas, and I went there through college. And in college, I took my first study abroad trip to China. I always wanted to visit somewhere abroad, and I wanted to go where people never went, where very few people have gone. And so, China was a very interesting place back in the early 2000s because there wasn't a lot of information online about it, not a lot of study abroad opportunities. So I went there and I learned Chinese language and writing and reading. And then later after college, I went to the Midwest, and that's when I first started weightlifting. I had done gymnastics through high school, and then after that I tried diving, and then just went into strength training in general. And then when I was in Ohio, I actually encountered my first set of bumper plates. And around that time I saw weightlifting for the first time, and on DVD and a little bit of videos online. And I thought it was really cool. I liked the athleticism. It really spoke to me, given my gymnastics background. I liked how the athletes were strong, and I liked their body shape. And so I was like, this is something that seems interesting. I want to learn more about it. But there wasn't a lot of information at that time. This was about 2005, 2004. And so very little YouTube, no Facebook, no Instagram at that time, And so you just had to search for very little information. And afterwards, so after training by myself, I moved out to Washington, D.C. to get a PhD. And I started working out with a club there. And, I got an introduction to some coaching, but I just realized that the way that I was doing it was not the way that I saw international lifters doing it. So I kept training by myself, and then eventually I met up with Ivan Abadjiev, the Bulgarian coach, and he, that was a very interesting experience. I trained with him for about a year, throughout back and forth with some friends of mine and my girlfriend at the time. And he showed me how far I could push my body, and that was it was a very eye-opening experience. I find myself to be a driven person and a motivated person, but training in that particular style, I was never confident doing it by myself because I was always worried I'd get hurt or just wouldn't survive. So it was great to train with him and have him be there to say, you're going to be okay, just overcome. And so then he left, and then eventually I met up with Jianping Ma through a friend of mine. And with him, I actually got the first real introduction to technique, professional technique. I finally had somebody that said, okay, you have to do this and this is why. It wasn't so much opinion, it was more fact, at least. And so after, corresponding with him a little bit, I was working on my technique and stuff, and then we eventually met up, and we just started working together. And he was going to China to visit his family, and he would actually go on trips to visit, weightlifting people as well. And he would actually take some students at his university informally who wanted to go see Chinese weightlifting. And so when I went with him, I met a lot of famous athletes at the time, like Lüscher, Yao Hui, and a bunch of other lifters. And that was an eye-opening experience, going to China again, but for weightlifting. Because I could still speak, that really opened a lot of doors. So not only in talking with the athletes and building relations, but also talking with the coaches and the researchers there. And so I was able to acquire some books and articles on weightlifting research, and because I can read, I was able to translate them. And so talking with Ma, I would review this information with Ma and ask him his opinions. And a lot of this was written by Ma's coach, and his coach was one of the founders of the system. And so working together with Ma, we both learned from each other, because he taught me how to lift in the Chinese style, and I had to pull out a lot of the stuff that he forgot, about from his coach. And so together, we were able to put that into practice, into something that we can teach to others. Because there's a lot of issues in weightlifting that are not issues in China, because all the athletes start very young and they learn, their way, and every coach will teach them that way. Whereas, out here, outside of China, you have many coaches with their own philosophies and techniques and styles and stuff, and so you jump from one coach to another, and you might feel like you have to start over again. So after talking, I brought him to a gym that I was working at to try a seminar, and we had lunch afterwards, and he mentioned that he would like to do this as a business, but he didn't have anybody to help him, and so he asked if I would want to go into business with him and do seminars. And this was before the seminar explosion, the social media explosion of weightlifting. And so I thought about it. I looked into how to go about this, just like building a website, how we would market this, how we would price it, sell it, what would we cover, and so so eventually we decided to go for it, and we created Ma Strength. We prepared in 2013, and then in 2014 we officially launched. So that's the story.
Cool. That's a really long story, and you gave a lot of details.
It's a long question.
That's true. long answer to a long question.
Yeah.
Before we dive into the weightlifting aspect, can you tell me what you studied and for how long you were in China for, and how long it took you to learn the language?
I've studied economics throughout. My bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD were all in economics, which has nothing to do with weightlifting. But I have a lot of skills from that education. So I have, as a PhD, I've become a researcher. So that has helped with Ma Strength, because I'm now able to go to libraries and stuff and look up this kind of research, also discern good research from bad research, and find a scientific justification for what we do. So additionally, when you get a PhD, or at least I put a lot of energy into building up my teaching skills. So as a PhD, you have to teach some classes at various levels, And I've always been interested in teaching. So I don't teach economics anymore, but I feel like I teach weightlifting, you know. And I learned Chinese back in 2003 during college. And so what I did was I went to summer school in Vermont. My college, you know, my undergrad was in Texas, but I went to summer school in Vermont. And they have a language program there at Middlebury College. And it's pure immersion. So they have various language schools there, but you go there to study the language that you learn. And so this was back in early 2000s, so I didn't have a smartphone. I didn't have an email account or email address that people frequented. You know, I didn't get a lot of messages, so I didn't have a lot of distractions either. So it was pretty easy to go there and not have to deal with other languages. Because when you go there, you're not allowed to read, write, or listen, or speak any language other than the one you're there to study. So for the first, you know, week or several, you're mute. You just listen, you know, and you point at stuff. And they give you a cheat sheet to say things like, what is X? You know, and you just point at whatever X is and stuff, and you start building up vocabulary. And you go to class, you know, 5 hours a day, and you have extracurricular activities that are also in Chinese and stuff. So I went there, and I had enough Chinese that if you dropped me in the middle of China, you know, I could do some essential stuff, like order a taxi, do some passport stuff, change money, order some food, get a hotel, like survival Chinese. And so after summer school, I applied for a study abroad program in the fall, and I went in January. And for there, I stayed in China, and that was, again, pure immersion. So it was very similar in terms of going to class, you know, 4 or 5 hours a day, Chinese homework, Chinese extracurricular activities, but now you're in China. So, you know, there's more experiences to be had wherever you travel and stuff, you know, just all Chinese. So then the year that I went to China was also the year that the SARS broke out later on in the year. So there was that, like that, I guess it's some sort of flu or whatever, but, you know, I was planning to stay there for the entire year. And, but once that broke out, you know, there was a call for Americans to come back. And so, you know, I thought about staying, but, you know, I really needed to graduate. So I was like, I have to go back. So what I did instead was I went back to Middlebury that summer and went to, you know, I started at level 1 when I first went to Middlebury. When I came back, I was at level 3. And they have 4 practical levels of proficiency. So I went there for that whole summer. And by the end of that time, you know, I achieved a level of proficiency where I could speak at about a high middle school level, you know, and I could read a newspaper and things like that. So that's how I learned. And you know, when I learned, it was reading, writing, and speaking. So all of it was taught. And yeah, and you know, I got to the point where I was dreaming in Chinese. You know, when you're surrounded by it, like everybody, even if they're not Chinese, people in your dreams, everybody's speaking Chinese. So you know, it's one of those things now where even if I don't speak it for a while, you never forget. So.
What about the duration? So, as I understood it, you had like 3 phases of learning Chinese. First one is the summer camp, then you went abroad, and then you came back and took another summer camp.
Yeah.
What about the durations of those stages?
So the summers were 9 weeks long, and then the study abroad was about 6 months or so. So, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned research in weightlifting. Can you, like I studied as well, I studied some management, some economics. Is the research readily available? Where is the research conducted? What kind of research is this? Does it come mainly from China? Does it come from Russia? Tell us a little bit more about the weightlifting research that you analyzed.
So the research that I focus on is Chinese research. It's performed by Chinese coaches, sports scientists, and trainers on weightlifting, Chinese weightlifting. So I've met a couple of researchers as well, so it's always interesting to read their published work. There are nowadays it's easier to find. There are some search engines, even at just regular universities, where you can, if you know the title of the journal that you're searching for or the database, you can go and look up Chinese articles. The problem is that those websites and stuff, they're all in Chinese, and they're not easy to navigate at all. And if you're not in a university setting, the process on how to make an account and pay to download articles and stuff is very complicated. And unless you are very familiar with Chinese payment accounts, like their versions of PayPal and stuff like that, and have an account there, which is not easy to get as a foreigner, it's very hard to get those articles. So, through Jianping and his family, I'm able to get that kind of access.
So what does a paper of research in weightlifting look like? So you mentioned they are coaches.
Some of them, yeah.
So are there practitioners? Are there theoretical researchers only? What does a regular paper look like in weightlifting research?
Kind of like the research that you would see, out west. There's all kinds of research. So, for example, sometimes there's a controlled experiment where somebody will write about doing something. For example, using certain cues or verbal prompts. They'll have one group of lifters that receive some sort of treatment, and another group of lifters that don't, that are in the same school. They randomly select them, they administer the treatment, and then they measure the effect. So they have a lot of weightlifters to do this, and so they're able to get some, draw some pretty cool conclusions. There are some opinion pieces, where coaches will write about their practical experiences. And so one example is, if a coach has a particular experience with a famous athlete, or if they happen to be coaching women of a certain weight class or a certain age group or whatever, sometimes they'll write an article saying, talking about strength training for, super heavyweights, in northern China, what their experiences are, or how to, strength training methods for women who are in middleweight classes, something like that. Additionally, you'll find some more theoretical stuff, some about technique or analyzing technique. You'll find some data-driven research where researchers will go to competitions and they'll take videos of the athletes, and then they analyze the kinematics of the lifts of missed lifts and successful lifts, and then they'll talk about why certain lifts failed and they didn't or were successful. Sometimes they'll just do a case study on a certain lifter, and they'll just say, okay, this is so-and-so's snatch from China Nationals, and this is what we saw, and this is how this athlete can improve. So there's a wide variety of research topics and also research methods. So, and additionally, you'll find survey articles or meta-analyses that will, look at whatever topics over decades, such as performance on over the years, or performances within certain weight classes, or what the opinions are on certain techniques or methods, things like that.
You mentioned before that you studied under basically two star coaches. One was Abadjiev and one was Ma. And you mentioned that under Ma, you, if I understood that correctly, you learned about technique. Are there any other differences between the two coaches, like how they taught you weightlifting, their approach to weightlifting, and also, let's answer that question first.
So Abadjiev taught me how to train hard and how far my body could go. And so after training with him, I felt like I had a better understanding of what high-level training could be, like how far you could go.
Hard, you mean by volume, by weight?
Just by intensity and everything, just the way you feel in general. Because when you train with him, everything was maximal, or at least as maximal as you could make it. And you train so frequently that, training just kind of became a haze. And, but he was there, living in the gym with you and just, pulling you through. And so, I remember one particular moment where I was doing 3 training sessions that day, and the third one was, around 11 at night, and so we had already done our second session, which was at about 5 o'clock, and it went till about 8:30 or so, and then the people I was training with, we had some food and everything, and then we went to sleep around about 9:30, just at the gym. We had some places to sleep, and then everybody was so tired, and we just crashed. And 10:45, he just knocks on the door. He's like, and then he's there waiting. He says, "Time to lift." So you warm up, and then by 11 o'clock at night, you're doing maximal jerks from the rack. And this is a Friday night. And I remember it so clearly because I'm here in the gym on a Friday night, almost around midnight, doing maximal jerks after doing heavy cleans and heavy snatches earlier in the day. It was really tough. But it surprised me in the sense that I could see how my body could perform. Because I would not have done that to myself. Because I would have been worried about overtraining, getting injured. But with Abadjiev, he was there to tell you, you're going to be okay. He's like, if you can get through this, just overcome. And you'll be better on the other side.
For how long did you train under Abadjiev?
So I was visiting California, over the course of about a year. And then I was always going back and forth because I was also working at the time, but as a personal trainer. So I was in the gym. If I wasn't training with him, I was training other people in the gym, and I could still get at least my squat workouts and stuff in. And at the peak, I was squatting about 20 times a week. So like 2 or 3 times a day sometimes, just going up to maximum and doing 1 or 2 doubles after that and finish. So,
did you sustain any injuries during that period?
Nothing acute. My whole body hurt. Like everything hurt. Just because your joints and stuff are kind of inflamed and sore. But what didn't hurt was to squat. Once you get under the bar and you do that first rep, it really hurts. But then after that it goes away, So you're and he would say you're in a constant state of adaptation. But everything hurt. But nothing, thank goodness, where it was like a tear or a sprain or anything like that. No. My hands were beaten up. I use straps a lot just because but you build it up over time. So,
How strong did you get in that period? So tell us about your numbers in the squat, in the snatch, clean and jerk.
So I met Abadjiev at a time where his belief was super specialized. So with him, he only believed in snatch, clean and jerk, front squat, and then the power versions, power snatch, power clean. He stopped doing back squats at the time. So, you'll see videos of old Bulgarian lifters doing that stuff. So over the time, he just kind of, started getting rid of extra movements and just focusing on the movements that he believed had the most carryover. So I basically stopped back squatting at that time. And, my best front squat at the time was in the about 160 kilos, and by the end of it, I was knocking at 210.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've never front squatted so much in my life. But it was, the only time you would back squat is if you got hurt somehow, like if you hurt your wrist on a clean or a snatch, or your elbow hurts and for some reason you just can't hold the rack, or if your rack position is so chafed that you just can't even hold the bar anymore, you would just end up doing back squats and stuff. So it was very specialized training, but it did get me stronger than I ever thought I could be, and in a way that I didn't think I could get through. I would, if you had told me before, hey, I have a program for you, why don't you just do it like this? Why don't you squat 20 times a week? I would have said, no, that I think I'm going to overtrain. I think that's going to be dangerous and whatnot. So, but it worked. So.
What about the snatch and clean and jerk?
So those numbers went up as well. But he wasn't a big technician. For him, it was more just speed, pull it really fast and stuff. And so I think that was one of the biggest differences between, training in the Bulgarian style and training in the Chinese style, because when the emphasis on technique was way more emphasized in China than in Bulgaria. So, at the time, I was knocking at a 120 to 125 snatch with Abadjiev, and my clean was in the 150 range. But then, after doing some refinements in China, I was able to snatch in the low 130s and clean and jerk in the low 160s. So I was able to express my strength a little bit better in a short time.
So let's talk about those refinements. So what changed when you switched to the Chinese method under Ma?
Well, so beforehand, with Abadjiev, you basically just pull hard. I didn't pay attention to where the bar was in relation to my body. I just knew that I had to pull it, I had to hit it at my hip, and I had to keep pulling it all the way through until I caught it. I had a little bit of knowledge of it based on reading some Russian manuals and stuff, but there just really wasn't a lot out there. You just watch people and you kind of try to follow what they do. But with the Chinese method, I was able to focus on everything. I was able to focus on my balance, my body positioning, my relationship to the bar's relationship to me. I was much more aware of what has to happen in the lift and how to achieve that. Whereas before, and just in talking to people, people would say, oh, I do lifting in this way because that works for me, or I lift in this style because I saw this lifter do it, and this style is then valid. So, so everybody's kind of guessing and trying to figure out what works for them. In China, I learned fundamental principles, whereas before, people are following different principles to justify their own lifting.
What did the training look like when you switched to the Chinese method? So you mentioned that you squatted 20 times per week under the Bulgarian method.
Yeah.
What was the difference in training specifics under the Chinese?
It was complete opposite. Way more diversity in assistance movements. So I actually started the back squat again. I went in China. A lot of athletes, they squat twice a week. So 1 day front, 1 day back. So you go from 20 sessions to 2 sessions, but you're doing a lot of other stuff to fill in. So even though you're not squatting so much, you're doing so many other kinds of pulls, bodybuilding, and strength training movements. So it's still, there's still a lot of work at the end of the day, but the work is very diverse.
Do you still train 3 times a day under the Chinese method?
No. At most, I was training twice a day.
Right.
Again, it was because there were just so many movements that were involved that you had a lot more stimuli for your body. You were sore in more places, whereas in the Bulgarian method, you just did snatch, clean and jerk, and front squat. So your legs were always tired, your body was tired from those kinds of lifts, but you didn't really get sore anymore. Whereas in China, you do so much that it's easy to get sore, because if you haven't push pressed in a while, you're going to get sore from that, and that's going to affect your jerk the next day. Whereas if you just jerk every day, then it doesn't really make you sore or anything.
You mentioned yesterday that you have some athletes under your tutelage, so you teach them how to lift. Can you tell me what kind of method you use for them? So is it a combination of what you learned over your career, or do you have your own style? What do you teach them?
So I mainly work with adults at a CrossFit privately, and I teach people technique. So a lot of people come to me because they've either been hurt or they're confused about weightlifting technique, and they don't know where to start, and so a lot of my instruction is at that beginner level, teaching people how to lift properly. And I do have some people that compete recreationally, and I give them suggestions to for their own programs and things that they need to work on. So, but because of Ma Strength, I don't run a barbell club or have an established continual program at a certain gym. Every weekend I'm somewhere else, training people, coaches and athletes about technique and programming and stuff.
Last question, then we can start with the seminar.
Okay.
How is Ma Strength structured? So you mentioned that you teach every single weekend in different locations. How many coaches are there in Ma Strength? Is it just you and Ma? Are there other people involved?
Yeah. So Ma Strength is me and Ma, and we work together. So I do a lot of social media. I do a lot of the Western stuff. Like I do a lot of the daily work, whereas Ma handles a lot of the China side of stuff. So whenever we do our camps there and order products and things like that, he's able to organize all of that and make it happen. And then I I do the execution and make sure that, people are corralled, people have their visas and stuff. I do a lot of that admin work to make it happen. So, we each have our strengths, and we work to along those lines. So, and he'll do. Well, we do seminars together, but we also do them individually as well, and that has to do with our schedules and where we live and where we can fly to the easiest. And so every weekend there's a Ma Strength seminar somewhere almost, and so we I do a lot of the European and South American seminars, and then we split up a lot of the American seminars.
How often do you guys meet up?
Depends. Maybe once a month or so. If we're in a big city and it's a really large seminar, we'll both come out. We work to keep it depends on the flow of the seminar. If it's a lot of people, we'll both come out to keep the ratio of instructors to students low, and if it's more than one level of seminar, we usually come together for that, just because it's a lot of work over the weekend, and so we can work together in those capacities. And then for the others, it just really depends on our schedule, our competition schedule, our travel schedule, and the size of the seminar.